want to pray for you and pray for us. And after we do that, you can take it away and we'll get going. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to connect with other great leaders. Just a reminder that we're all in this together. Our work may look a little bit different, Lord, but we're all building the same kingdom and we're all serving you together. And so we're grateful for this time just to be together for a few minutes. God, I just pray that you would speak through Drew today. And we're all in different places in ministry, both personally and professionally. But Father, I just pray that you would speak to each and every one of us with the specific message that you want us to hear today. We just commit this time to you. We pray that you'd bless it and make it special and speak through Drew in a great way. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. It is a fantastic opportunity to be able to connect with all of you here. As Jonathan said, my name is Drew Schmitz. I'm actually the executive director of an organization called Little Cloak. And I've been leading that for about a year and a half here now. I'm actually located on the East Coast. I'm actually just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And so in the same boat, Cottonwood and Prescott, beautiful weather that's there. I heard earlier we have some great weather here as well. But we actually relocated here about 2 years ago from North Phoenix. My wife and I and our 3 kiddos, we lived there in North Phoenix, and we miss it, miss the people, miss our pool in our backyard and the beautiful spring and summer. Not so much the summer heat, but the spring weather for sure. And so this is great to be able to reconnect and just to be able to connect with all of you here and talking about what it means to lead well and thrive well. And what we do at Little Cloak is we actually provide mental, emotional, and spiritual support to team members, to employees, to the workplace through a completely virtual platform. I'm actually going to share a lot more about that later. But over the years, I've held a lot of different positions of leadership within startups and not-for-profit organizations for well over 20 years. Primarily serving a lot of times in ministries and within the church and getting a lot of experience there. And one of the things that I'm spending a lot of my time with over the last several years is thinking about and leaning into culture. And that's really what I want to talk about today is this idea of what does it mean to think about cultural health within an organization. Jonathan and Heather and the connection that I've had with them and just talking about a lot of the influence that each of you have in your organizations. And I've been part of organizations that are healthy and vibrant, and I've also been part of organizations that are toxic and will drain the life out of your soul as well. And so being part of those, I'll just tell you, I've led organizations that have thrived culturally, and I've led organizations that have failed culturally. And so I'd venture to guess many of you probably have experiences the same way, and you can look back over the years of your interactions with different companies. And I think it just leads us to the question of what kind of culture do we have right now in our organization? And now I'm, this is kind of this interaction where I'm a talking head on your screen right now, but I love interaction. And so we'll be keeping an eye on the chat. And so if there's ever something that kind of pops up and you're like, talk more about that, or I have a question that came up, please drop it in there and we can interact with that as we go. I prefer to have a lot more interaction than just me talking the whole time. And if you're watching this on a recording, too bad. You just miss out on. So you're gonna have to join the next live one and make sure that you prioritize that. And so as soon as we say though culture, and start thinking about it, the first thing I'm asking myself is what kind of culture do I have right now? And I want to tell myself, I'm running this organization for the last year and a half. We've grown a ton over the last year and a half, and I want to tell myself, we have a healthy culture. I think, right? And I want to tell myself it's better than it was a year ago. Or the other thing that comes to my mind too is, at least the culture that's in our organization right now is not as bad as that organization over there, and so and so. And we just kind of do this like comparative process. But how do we really know if the culture of our organization is healthy and is thriving, or it's failing and unhealthy? um, and leading, many of you I know in here, you're leading startups. Many of you are leading not-for-profits, and it's a place where the freedom to even think about this is not always there. Because I've been in that spot where, I feel like leading the organization is actually more like thinking about, do I spend our last $200 on a software, or do I spend it on snacks to bribe our team from quitting? You know, and so stepping back and thinking about some of these bigger questions, we don't always have the freedom to do it. And that's why it's really, really healthy for us to be able to step into these moments and just take some time to think about this. I know from my experience in leading nonprofits, it's, there's a lot of it that's pretending to know what you're doing while Googling how do I file taxes, and I Google how to motivate an unpaid intern. And, I felt like a lot of times crying in the bathroom was my leadership style, and so there's so many layers to this that you're kind of like the freedom just to be able to take a pause. And I hope that that's what this is. Even, these moments we have here together, you can take a deep breath and really step back and know that there's support, that there's help to lean into this. Um, I want to tell, a brief story here. I just call it a tale of two bosses. And it was a really, really big lesson for me that I looked back, and it's formed a lot of my thought around culture. When I was young, I had just started with a nonprofit organization, and I came on board, and the COO of this nonprofit, his name was Jim. Jim, successful business guy, stepped into this later in life. He was a Wall Street trader for many, many years. We had about 100 staff in this nonprofit organization, and despite that large of a staff, Jim would stop into my office almost every week and sit down with a coffee in his hand, and we would chat. And I was young, new, just out of school, and we talk about sports and family and travel, and really nothing related to the programs we were running. And I remember Jim, he has a wife, he had several young kids. They vacationed often together. He would come back and tell the stories of all the things they did. And um, and 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 there was something about that that was really, really refreshing. And I was young and I didn't realize, but what I was watching was a leader with a really, really healthy work life balance. Well, over the next 3 years of that organization, it grew really, really fast. Year over year, numbers are doubling and tripling, and it's just trying to keep up with it all. The responsibilities growing, scaling, adapting the organizations, the pressure grows. And Jim, as the CEO, just consistently the same guy. However, the board of that organization, the CEO of that organization, they saw this as the opportunity to get more growth, more results, and really wanted to change some of the pieces of the organization. And one of those really came in conflict with Jim's philosophy. And I'll remember just one week, Jim got up in a staff meeting and he resigned. And it was a sudden kind of piece, and we celebrated Jim, and I had still had a relationship with him. And I was young and naive, and I thought, okay, we'll get the next guy, and the next person will come in, and until the next COO came in, and Steve showed up, and Steve was a driver, came out of the financial world. We were told that he knew how to make organizations efficient and competent, and he regularly would work 75 to 80 hours a week, and he was a driver, and his family life was tense, and our work life became tense. And for the first 6 months, I'll tell you, our organization grew fast. But after 6 months, the numbers started to stall. And we were working really, really hard. But what I hadn't realized, and again, I'm just young, just kind of watching this whole thing, but the culture had changed under Steve. And it wasn't just Steve, it was all of us. And looking back, this is 20 years now, I could see what was happening, and it was a shift in culture. Really, the whole thing there telling the story is because it was a shift in leadership. And here's why I tell this story. The question that I asked earlier is your culture, is your organization's culture healthy or unhealthy? And the simplest way to actually answer that question is actually with another question. And that's the question of, as the leader, are you healthy or unhealthy? And I'm going to define a lot of that a little bit better here so we can kind of get underneath that. But I'm just telling you, this isn't rocket science. None of this is really original with me. But what I'm finding, what I'm discovering as I'm reading, as I'm researching, and then as we are interacting with hundreds of organizations, is a thriving culture really originates from thriving leaders. And Jesus redefined leadership really in this radical way. And that thriving, this being a thriving leader is moving away from power and status and control and towards a place of servanthood and humility and integrity. I mean, Jesus, he's really clear. The way that we lead is by serving others. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be a servant of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And Jesus says that, that this is this reality of the thriving leader is the one who's leading genuinely and practice what you preach. You know, Matthew 23 is these are people who do not practice what they preach. Everything they do is done to be seen by people. And there's the reality of of making sure that not just that we're serving others and practicing what we preach and the genuine care that flows from that, but Jesus also is this the model of this protective, sacrificial, deep relational kind of care for those around him. He says the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so this principle that's underlying this, as when we think a lot of times about culture of our organizations and our interaction with them, I think we think at a very high level of of a lot of other pieces, but sometimes the biggest thing we can look at when we think about the culture of our organization is in the mirror. And this isn't something, some experiential colloquialism that I draw out here. And in many ways there's also a reality to this that it's not just a biblical principle. Recent research is actually picking up on this as well. This is Frontiers in Psychology says that there's a direct correlation between the health of an organization's culture and the health of its leadership. International Journal of Business Communication, the results of the study, 355 workers showed that leadership's mental, emotional, and physical health behaviors had a direct effect on the employee's satisfaction and an indirect effect on turnover. You see, these findings indicate that leadership behaviors are directly corresponding to well-being in the workplace. Now, here's the rub, and here's also like just the interaction that I would love to hear from you is if I came to you and I was able to sit down at, I think I saw someone was at Starbucks there and we could go grab Starbucks there and sit down and have, I'd order a nice chai and you get whatever you want. And I would ask you, hey, what do you think is the biggest influence on your organization's culture? Most of us wouldn't say, well, me, most of you, there's other things that I think would come to mind. And so in the chat, I'm curious, what do we usually point to? What do we often look to as like, this is the thing that's influencing the culture of our organization? The temperature, we'll define culture a little bit more here, but like what do we usually look at and what do we think with like that's going to be the issue? If we can get that fixed, the culture is actually going to be and so what are some of the things there? You can pop them in the chat as you kind of interact with this a little bit. But one of the pieces that I hear a lot of times as I interact with leaders is staff attitudes. If our team was more positive, if their team was more motivated, if they really like got their hearts behind it, maybe there's change that's happening, and with organizations change happens a lot, and that tends to be one of the revealers of it. And if they were less resistant to change, another one that I think of is external pressures. A lot of times when our organizations were struggling, one of the first things that pops up is, well, I mean, the economy and you know, how, I can see, I don't know if you've seen the politics lately. I don't know if you're following some of the news right now, but there's a lot of it. I love the, kind of some people popping some things here, employee trust and leadership, how the team works together. That's a good one. Board relationships. Like if the board could just get along, the culture of our here's another one that I think of a lot. It's lack of resources. You know, if we just had, if we just had $100,000 right now, I don't think any of this would be an issue, right? If our budget wasn't so limited, if we just, if our business model wasn't just operating on like hope and vibes and a Google document from 2014, right? Because that's how I feel like a lot of organizations function, you know, we would be so much better. I love that lack of a unity, pace of it. And these are some things that are pointed. Now, don't get me wrong. These things do influence culture, but nowhere near the extent to which the health of you as a leader influences the health of a culture. Now, I want to be clear that when I talk about cultural health, when we're talking about this idea of culture, what we're talking about is the shared values, beliefs, and practices that shape how an organization operates. So again, like these are values, these are things that we hold in common together, that we value, we believe in, and we practice. And I want to be clear about that because we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's so many times where, we can put our values on the wall and we can print them all out and we can all quote them exactly. But if they're not practiced, if they're not shaping the way that we exist together, it's not really cultural health. Another way of calling it is culture impacts decision making. So it's the way that we think about how to make decisions and engage with our team and overall effectiveness. And so organization cultural health refers really to the overall well-being and functionality of your organization. That bringing together these values and beliefs and behaviors, and for organizations like ours, where faith and what we believe about the gospel so deeply impacts who we are and our identity, that must flow into the way that our culture works together. And it's essentially this emotional relational climate of our workplace that's built off of the gospel. And in many ways, what it comes to is, if you think of an organization, I like to think of it like a body, like a human, and you think of the physical realities of your immune system, almost be is that cultural health. And when the immune system is strong, your body can adapt, can respond, can work through different situations. But when the immune system is weak, and even that smallest issue can become a major problem really, really fast. And in the same way, that the culture health of an organization, when it's strong, the company can go through change and upheaval and can work through those things really, really simply and easily, and sometimes even become stronger as a result of it. But when it's weak, even the little issues can really becomes a problem. Now, real quickly, I want to walk through just some key aspects of when we're again just helping define a little bit and think about some organizational cultural health issues, and what that looks like in an organization. And when we meet with companies and interact with companies that are looking for input into influencing culture, these are some of the things that we look to. Number one is emotional safety. This is this idea of, do people feel like they're safe to come up and say, hey, there's a problem? Do people feel like they can raise their hand and say, hey, I'm concerned about this, or share ideas? Um, do people in your organization feel like they can admit mistakes? Do you feel like they can ask questions without fear or embarrassment or retaliation? I remember, in that organization I was referring to before, where one of the unhealthy pieces that really became clear under Steve's leadership was there's this culture of sarcasm that grew, and how quickly it, for the sake of a laugh, the things that we would say and the people we would laugh at, and it became this really, really emotionally unsafe place. And without realizing it, we had a, you kind of look at it like, oh, we had a lot of fun together, but at the cost of what? And so emotional safety, clarity of purpose and values, there's this understanding. Does your team have an understanding of what your mission and vision? Why are we doing what we're doing? And this isn't, this is the sad reality of a lot of organizations that we interact with, is it's more than just a poster on the wall. That you to go up to a person and to ask that person, what are the vision, what's the mission, what are those things? And a lot of times, your team members, they can tell you, they can say to you, hey, these are the values that we have. Here's the 4 values. Here's the 5 purposes. Here's the things that, they can list them all. But the next question is even more important. What does that mean? What do those things look like? Here's another one: is trust and transparency. Communication has to flow openly and honestly. You know, that leadership, there's a trust, and this is a question of like, do your teammates trust you? And you'll be able to tell really quickly in a lot of meetings and interactions of this sense of there's this awareness of, I believe what you're saying is true and is genuine, is real, and there's an integrity and there's a consistency. Some of the most unhealthy organizations I've been part of lacked that transparency and that consistency between word and actions. And how many conversations come around, man, you said this, but then you did that. And here's another one: is leadership alignment. And so leaders model the behaviors they want from others. And there's the one, the disconnect between what a leader says and what they do. It's, a lot about the integrity. It creates a cultural dissonance. Another one that we assess is adaptability. This is, can you respond to change and take feedback and evolve? And this will come up in a couple different places, but the ability to see something that's happening and say, okay, that's where our organization can lean in a little bit more without losing our core identity, without diminishing our purpose and our values, but adapt to the situations where the need rises the most. Another key aspect of cultural health is just well-being and work-life balance. I saw Ron, emphasizing this is one of the biggest challenges for your team. Burnout should never be normalized. That employees should feel the sense of support, and the sense of that the culture doesn't glorify overworking. I've been part of those organizations too, where there's a sense of, the person who would sacrifice the most was the one who was rewarded the most, and there's something dissonance that's in that as well. And the last thing is just recognition and accountability. Um, good work should be acknowledged and celebrated, and this awareness of, hey, we're going to see those who are pursuing this and after the value and after the vision, and then also at the same time there's accountability. There's a sense of like, hey, we're asking the hard questions even to when we need to, and we're addressing things fairly and consistently. I think a part of this, though, too, is why this matters for organizations, and this is what we're finding, especially. And I tried to kind of key into this, especially thinking about nonprofits and startups, and especially when you're around a vision that's around the gospel and what that means is it matters. All those things matter. Those key elements matter because if when we're doing mission-driven work, it requires a mission aligned culture. And so this is the place where too many of our mission driven works that are out there, there's actually a dissonance that people feel, and I don't know if they can always put their finger on it, but the as a nonprofit, as a startup, the why is so important. That when I'm working with our team, one of the things I talk about regularly with our team here is why are we doing what we're doing? And I have to remind them again and again because we have to talk about it. And part of that, me bringing that up, isn't reminding them, it's reminding myself. Because you as you get into the work, you can forget your purpose and the vision and what's driving everything. And part of a toxic or misaligned culture that happens there is what it does, it starts to lose a sense of actually the work, what we're doing. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I took my kiddos. I have a 15-year-old, 11-year-old, and 8-year-old, and we visited a nonprofit here in North Carolina where I live. And it's an amazing nonprofit. It's serving those who are neglected in our community. Their vision, really, really clearly plastered on their wall, is caring for the least of these. And while we were in their store, um, the manager comes over and berates in front of all of us, in front of the store, berates one of the staff members. And we were able to kind of go through there, and then we get out and we get in the car, and my teenage son sits in the front seat with me, and he's way too highly analytical, and he just sees things so clearly. And he says, how can they care for the least of these? This is the question he asks. How can they care for the least of these if they can't care for their own? And that's the place where there's a dissonance, there's a disconnect that's there, and that's affecting culture. And that's a place of that's leadership, that's an internal reality, and this is why it matters. I think the other thing is, I would say limited resources amplify cultural weaknesses. The big corporations, they have in some ways a pad, they have a cushion for themselves where nonprofits and startups don't have the luxury of a huge budget and massive HR teams and deep benches of talent. The team is small. One person who's working through difficulty can have a really outsized effect. And especially if you as a leader are struggling, those cracks, they're going to show really, really fast. Especially when people are stretched really, really thin. And so this is why this matters so much, is because that cultural health can become a force multiplier, either positively or negatively. The other piece is just retention is crucial and expensive. Um, One of the questions I often will ask organizations is, do you know how much it costs to replace a volunteer? And I would ask you that question. Like, I hope you guys have thought through this, and it doesn't have to be an exact science, but a general even idea of how much does it cost? How much does it cost to replace a staff member? And in especially when we talk about nonprofits and startups, um, people often will take these roles. They'll volunteer, or they'll take a position with your organization because they care. But if that environment, if that culture is toxic and chaotic, how long is that going to be able to hold on? And hiring and onboarding is immensely costly. It's costly, I'm not just talking about financially, I'm talking about time, I'm talking about momentum. And so to be aware, this matters. And oftentimes you don't see this all the time on the bottom line at the end of a budget meeting, and you don't always see this on the bottom line at the end of your quarterly reviews. But it has a cost. And what if one of the best ways that you and I can expand our budget this year is actually just found right here in this spot? That you're looking for, like, maybe if we get so many more donors and another giver, and maybe if we got another contract with this over here, and but maybe one of the places where we say, hey, we're gonna invest in our culture in a way that we don't have the turnover, and that's just not going to cost us in the same way it is going to cost us in previous years. Another piece is the cultural health drives agility. um, most organizations are going to operate in a constantly changing environment. Things are changing in Phoenix, Arizona really fast, on a cultural level, on a political level, on a financial level. You just look at the last 3 months, 4 months here. I just look at, we were living there 3 years ago. Look at how things have changed 3 years. And in that time, how has your organization changed? How quickly did you adapt and strategies start to shift? And again, keeping our identity, keeping our principles, keeping those things. How do you respond to these? And this, I think that the primary example of this, the first thing I think of is I look back at like COVID. That was one of the craziest moments. I imagine, look at some of you, you probably are still dealing with the trauma of that. Within 1 month, the whole playing field just changed. Environments shifted more quickly than ever. And that's a place where to step back and see, okay, how did our culture respond to that? And what are some of the healthy things maybe that came from that? But what are some of the unhealthy things? Because that drives your ability to respond. And a healthy culture, really about resilience. Teams can experiment and adapt quickly in a safe culture. But, one of the things in our organization when we went through COVID, I realized really, really quickly how much me as the leader of that organization, I became the the stopgap, but I became the middle of that, and everything had to go through me. No one else could make decisions. Everyone had to ask it and run it, and that was just not going to work. And people paralyzed by fear of failure, they didn't not sure who could make decisions, and communication, just all those things we learned in that. And how can we prepare and work through that even to make our organization more agile? Part of it's investing in culture. I think the other thing I would just say this is, here's why it matters: because your culture really is your brand. The culture that you develop as an organization, relationally, values, purposes, interaction. I think that's the place of it drives, like, organizational culture isn't just fluff. It's actually the outflow of who you are as an organization. And so thinking about the all these pieces together, and it really reflects, I think we think so many times of brand, we think of color schemes, and we think of logos, and we think of wording and how marketing and all these pieces, but really there's so much of it that's about the relationship of who we are. See, one of the questions that popped up here is, how do you recognize that in yourself, and your leadership? And I think this is what some of the questions where we're going to talk a little bit about that self-examination, to step back and to kind of think about, how do I see how my personal health is affecting this and driving this. And so let's talk a little bit about the leadership culture connection here and start building this bridge to see how these two things work together. First of all, I would say organizational culture mirrors leadership health. And if I just, again, sitting down to coffee right now and asked you, have you ever walked into a workplace and felt the tension before anyone even said a word? Have you ever, maybe it's or the opposite. You stepped into a space and you immediately sense like the energy and the focus and the trust, and that's actually associated with the culture, and that's really driven by the leadership of the organization. Leaders set the emotional and behavioral tone. Whether you like it or not, you as a leader are the thermostat. You're going to turn it up and turn it down for the entire organization. Your energy, your habits, how you show up to a meeting, how you handle stress. And that's one of the hard things about being a leader. It's kind of it's one of those pieces where it's a little frustrating at times too, is that, I feel the weight of this. And so there's this higher responsibility that even the Apostle Paul talks about as leaders. We feel that weight. And so, even like, I would just ask you, even today, now look back at your first interaction with your team today. What was the tone that you set today? I know for me, a lot of times I'm up in the morning, I'm on my computer early, I'm shooting off emails, interacting with different people. And so just even thinking about, like, what was the tone of some of those, some of my emails this morning were short and maybe a little bit overly direct, and maybe I could just be aware of a little bit how I come across in that, but because hey, I'm going to set the tone. for the emotional, behavioral, and for what this organization at living out this culture. Again, the health of a leader influences the health of the culture. I think the other thing is just burnout and stress. It trickles down. When leaders are constantly stressed and disconnected or burning out, it's just not isolated. It's going to leak into how decisions are made and how people communicate and how safe or unsafe people feel at work. And so here's just the question I would ask you along those lines is, what would change in your organization if you prioritized your own well-being as a core part of your leadership responsibility? There's this idea that, okay, burnout, stress, they're gonna, it doesn't just affect me. I think that's a place where we try to think like, I'm just gonna throw this on my back and I'm gonna carry this myself. And I'd done that way too often. So what would happen if I actually prioritized my own well-being? And I just want to take a pause here and I want to step into that a little bit more. Any questions that kind of popped up? Again, I always use that chat, but if there's anyone who's thinking about something or kind of like, hey, can you dive a little deeper onto this? I just want to take a breather here and a pause.
Drew, this is Jonathan. I heard a story the other day that I think is just so right on with everything that you're talking about. It was a leader who was at an organization and was just talking to an individual and said, "Do you like your job here?" And this younger guy said, "I love it here." And he said, "Tell me why." And he said, "Well, the when managers walk by, they stop to ask me how I'm doing, and it seems like they really care and they engage, and there's an openness here and just a comfort level with all that." And the leader who was talking to this young man said, "That's great," but he didn't stop. He didn't stop there. The young man said, "It's not like this at the other job where I work." And
Mm.
so he said, "What's the difference there?" And he said, "Over there, managers just walk by without even acknowledging me. They don't ask me questions. They don't seem interested. There's a tension in the air." And he said, "Over at that job, my second job, I just keep my head down and try to do what I'm supposed to do and just try to steer clear of everybody and everything else." And the leader that was having that conversation with that young man, his takeaway was a reminder to all of us that that young man, that's the same person, right? The same person that's working both jobs. And he feels great at one and he loves it, and not so much at the other one. And it's all because of overall culture and overall leadership. But the stress point was, again, the difference wasn't this guy. The difference was the culture and how leadership was handling things in two different ways.
So good. And I think, Jonathan, with that, what I've recognized is, I even, during my master's, I was working in a large corporation, and they really saw the value of what you're talking about, that like care for the employees. But what they tried to do is they tried to implement it into an HR protocol. So they try to create procedures around it,
Mhm.
and that's the place where I love it for this person who's kind of processing this with you is they're recognizing this guy actually cares. He genuinely cares about me. He's interested. There's a check-in that's happening there, because I've had managers who they'll do the check-in, but it's just a check off box,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I can feel it. I just know it. I know that they're like, oh, you're doing your thing again that you have to do, and you're doing the rounds, and and I felt like I could at some points I could just I could make up anything what I wanted to. I could just say whatever I wanted to say. I don't think he was actually listening, and he would just go, okay, thanks, and move to the next person. So that I think it really stems from the heart of a leader, and the value that's there, because that is an investment for that individual, that leader, to stop. He's taking time, He's sitting in a space
Mhm.
that's there that, this is something he's had to think about how to prioritize that and how to prioritize that in his schedule. And this, he has to manage his time around those things to say, this is a priority. And it also has to flow from, I think the other thing I've seen is, a lot of leaders, that ability to do that, to care for them, is also, there's a fear of like, what if I sit down with that guy and I talk to him and he shares something with me that I don't know what to do with it? Like, so that's a little scary. And where do I go with that? And so there's just so many layers that it can open up. But I think that, that's one of the pieces too that comes to, why, why aren't leaders doing that? And I think that it draws back to one of the other questions that I often have is why aren't, again, the correlation is healthy culture stems from healthy leadership. And so if we're taking care of culture, then we're taking care of ourselves. And so why don't we do a better job of taking care of ourselves?
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think one of the things I hear often is they look at it and they're like, well, caring for myself, that's like a bunch of like new age hippy dippy nonsense. Like, this whole concept of caring for myself is really, especially for years and years, it was antithetical, I think, to the image of a serious leader and what they looked like. Like we would hear that idea of, hey, you got to take care of yourself in some ways in order to take care of others better. And I think we would roll our eyes at that idea, of, well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna, like light a candle and tell me to like do some meditation or something like that, or is like nature walks? Like, what are we talking about here? And what that is I think that's trivializing the care for our people, because we're trivializing the care for ourselves.
Yeah.
um and we see it as like, I can't afford that, you know.
Drew, I was gonna jump in too because you continue to highlight the emotional side of things, and I think not only do I recognize for myself this issue, as you talked about self-reflection. I grew up in a home where emotions weren't managed well at all, so I didn't have that modeled. And as I grew in my leadership, I realized where I was following some of those same patterns. And we see this has become a very central topic, is that emotional leadership and having emotional intelligence of any kind. And I think that dissonance you talked about between the culture internally and what we do serving, one of the things I think that happens is we have this commitment to serve others, the least of the lost. And it's a mandate that we know as Christians. And yet we've not spent the time understanding our own emotional well-being or even evaluating some of those things. We've got some spiritual maturity that goes on, a calling, all of that, but really immature emotional. And I say this because I've been on that journey myself, and I've had to see the impact of that on those that I lead. And I was just a quick story on this is I was leading a new team pretty recently, and there was some cultural breakdowns before I even came in, and we were working, and it was showing up in how the team was interacting. And I personally was going through a lot with my own family, and I came into this meeting not aware, thinking of how short my fuse was on things. And I had a reaction, an emotionally unhealthy reaction to their emotionally unhealthy environment. And that, at first I felt like, oh no, I failed right from the get go.
Mhm.
But if there's anything I've learned is that even though I don't do it perfectly, I may not be the guy who walks around and sits down and has coffee every single time, because I'm a driven person. I'm a type A. But when I saw what I did, because I've done some work in this area, I could step back and say, okay, my reaction to that was inaccurate. And
Mhm.
then I had to model now, what does an emotionally healthier person in a process do when you have an emotionally unhealthy reaction. So it took, weeks to go. I had to own it in that meeting, and then I had to follow up with individuals and create health in other environments. So I say that because it's one thing to be self-reflecting, but we're never going to do it perfect. And I think this is something we have to own as leaders is, we're human beings and we get impatient, and we do need to care about our teams like Jesus cared about his team as much as the groups that we serve. So that dissonance isn't there, and that this dissonance, even in our own spiritual versus emotional well being. So, a lot said there, but boy, I relate to that. And I think it's huge right now for us as
And there,
leaders.
one of the things you're doing there, Heather, is so valuable. Is I think you sense there's a cultural dissonance there amongst the team, and too many times what it is okay, I got to figure out like what they're doing wrong and how to confront that and how to and many times that like it's just gonna I'm just gonna start with some self-work. Like what does that reveal about me, and what are some of the things I can work on in this that I can reflect on? And in some ways it's a carryover. This is the leadership style that I grew up under, was this concept, this idea of if I'm a good leader, I don't need self-care. You know, if I'm if I am really strong as a leader, this is not something that's needed. And so, I've worked with, a CEO, and she explained what she expected of herself. And she said any self-respecting leader has to have all the answers. You have to do it the right way. You have to set the tone. And why would anyone follow me if I didn't have that kind of thing? And so what we have to do, I think, is we have to start to reframe our understanding of culture. We have to reframe our understanding even of our self-care as an investment that's going to increase. And this is the piece that increases productivity, it increases effectiveness. And the reality too is, you kind of started to hit on this a little, Heather, was Jesus talks a ton about self-care. I think of Jesus often withdrew to a lonely place and prayed. Jesus comes to his disciples and he says, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place. We're going to get some rest." I think of what Jesus says. He says, like, what's the price of 5 sparrows? It's 2 copper coins. God doesn't forget a single one of those sparrows, and the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. This reality of Jesus is like, hey, like there's so much worth that's there, and he teaches this form of self-care that's really deeply connected to, I think, rest. And I saw this earlier in the chat, but also prayer, I think balance, I think understanding our value before God. And it's also unknotting. The thing that I really wrestled with a lot, Heather, when it came to this, was I saw self kind of like looking in the mirror and addressing that as selfishness. But in reality, I'm recognizing now more and more, this is actually about sustainable care grounded in a spiritual wholeness. For sake of time, I'll keep us going here a little bit, but some of the key indicators, I think, of healthy leadership, a healthy leader, is something we, it popped up earlier in the chat, and I think it's really, really key. It's just a self-awareness and emotional intelligence. I think there's this ability to be able to recognize when, where I'm at and what I'm feeling, and I think Jesus asks a question about this as well. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank that's in your own eye? Jesus talks about this idea of being aware of what's in our heart, and he says the things that come out of our mouth are coming from our heart. And so there's this self-awareness and listening to ourselves and listening to the situation. I think there's also some key indicators, and we'll get to some like challenging questions here that I've come for me, but also it's a sustainable routine for well-being. That do I have a routine in my life that this is sustainable? And I still remember the conversations where I'd sit down with my wife and she's like, hey, we're too busy. You're too busy. You're gone too much. And my constant answer was, well, once we get past this date, once we get to May, end of May, once we and eventually she just like she picked up on and caught on. She's like, it's always next month. It's always next quarter. It's always like, and so the routine that you're living right now is not sustainable. And so how do we get that to place to have a routine that's sustainable? And then also, I think strong relational networks. That's why I think Venture 19, what you guys are doing here is so invaluable, is that you're surrounding yourself with other leaders who have creating a trusted circle of getting mentors and peers and coaches and support and feedback and even outside perspective and saying, hey, I want to be healthy. I'm not I don't like I'm not a physician that can heal myself. I need other people to be able to speak into my life. And so again, this is idea of like, if we want healthy culture, it has to start by looking in the mirror and taking that time that your culture doesn't live on your website, your culture doesn't live in your mission statement and your quarterly reports. It lives in the way that you as a leader and your team interact, and the relationships that are happening there in this thriving it's a living, breathing organism, and it starts with us. And along those lines, I just came up with just a couple questions that just help us to kind of step back and to think about this for ourselves. Now, the last thing I want is to feel like, 'cause sometimes I jump onto different, interactions like this, and I just feel beat up. I come to the end of it and I'm just like, man, I am the worst. I like, this is, you just feel the gap of this. And it's okay to feel that gap. I think it's what we do with that and take this. And so the last thing I want you to feel like is that this is like just going to beat you up, but to feel like, okay, I want to know where I'm at. I want to know how our culture is doing, because I want to be healthy, and help this like give that assessment where we can kind of start to see it, and then lean into some of this community and lean into some of those routines that are going to help you, and becoming aware. Again, those are the indicators are there, and what they can do is you come back for these questions and look into, okay, which are these do I have to lean into? And so emotional health, am I consistently overwhelmed or exhausted? Again, Jesus has this profound understanding of human emotions, and the importance of emotional honesty and balance and healing. And how many times does Jesus in the Gospels come to people and he says, "Hey, why are you so afraid? Why are you so, come rest." There's this challenge to that sense of overwhelmed, exhaustion, anxiety kind of pieces. Um, Here's another, just again, we're just kind of just stepping back and kind of looking at ourselves. Do I feel emotionally stable and present in my work? And I can tell you the many times where, as I would lead organizations, and as I would get stressful, as I get overwhelmed, as I get exhausted, and I could disconnect emotionally from the work and just go through the motions. You know, I could just, you know, keep checking off the check boxes. We could keep this thing moving. But to actually be honest with ourselves and be willing to step back and be like, is that where we're at? Is that where I'm at? Or can I be calm under pressure? I don't want to be reactive. I'm not distracted. How about life balance? Am I setting up healthy boundaries between work and personal life? I saw this earlier in the chat as well. Just that boundaries piece is so important. Do you actually like unplug? Are you protecting your personal time the same way that you protect a board meeting? That priority of that big meeting, like that's you prepped for it, you locked that in the calendar, you told everyone, don't bother me during this thing. Do you do that same when it comes to your personal time? I think along with that, do you prioritize rest and recreation. Again, I love that Jesus's invitations. Come with me by yourself. This is Mark chapter 6. He's come to a quiet place, get rest. Rest isn't a weakness. These things aren't optional. Leaders who don't refill their tank are going to burn out. And I'll tell you, from someone who knows, I've burnt out. And what happens is it didn't just influence me, it influenced a lot of people around me because I didn't prioritize these things. Here's another one is our relational health. Do you have mentors and peers who speak into your life? Like, do you have people who help you process challenges and blind spots? And I mean, leadership can be so lonely, but it doesn't have to be. And that's why organizations like this exist, right? Like because you don't have to be lonely. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. Here's another one. Am I actively building a culture of trust and support? Being healthy, it requires us to kind of look in the mirror a little bit on these things. And looking at these, my emotional health and my work-life balance, my relational health. And if you look at those things, what's one of the things you want to work on in the next, week here, in the next month? What do you think is like that? Here's the area that I think it's where I'm weakest. And I'm going to give you some like just practical pieces you can work on it here as well. But leaning into those things of like, hey, I want to be strong. Now, I would also encourage you, look at the ones where you're strongest. Be aware, be self-aware of like, I'm actually I've become really strong in the relational health piece, and I know where that's at, and how can I lean into those who maybe not as strong as I am in the relational health and come alongside them. A couple practical tools that I would just really encourage you is scheduling reflective time. I just, again, this is a place where a lot of times within the community of the church that I'm a part of, and that time in devotional, that time in like stepping away and asking, we do Bible studies together, and that often gives that reflection time to kind of like see where I'm at. We really encourage journaling. What's going on in my heart, what's draining me this week, what's fueling me this week, but scheduling that. Again, we're talking about routines. When it comes to organizationally, I think delegation mapping is a huge tool to get out and audit and map out current responsibilities and identify tasks that like we need to entrust to others, and find those urgent versus important and prioritize those things, and teaching leaders that like teaching others how to delegate those things and pick up those things. And but delegation mapping is a big piece of like mental and emotional care for yourself. Peer support circles like this group is a great one. Monthly, finding the community around you and checking in with each other. I think boundaries, and this is a place of instituting boundaries within your organization. That here's when you're off on a day. This was a big struggle for me. Is I have my phone everywhere I go, and so you have access to me everywhere I go, and that became really unhealthy in that way. And so disconnecting at times and coming back and saying focus. And I had to learn this when I started juggling both school and work and multiple things. Having those boundaries set up. Crisis preparedness is another big one. Hey, we have a plan in place. When things fall apart, they're going to something's going to happen that's unexpected, and when it does, we have plans in place. We've kind of put some pieces there, and that this is not going to push us over the edge, and it gives us an ability to respond rather than react and step into it. The other thing I would encourage is just digital detox. That scheduling times to whatever that is. For me, I'm fishing. So I'll tell you, when I was living in North Phoenix, Payson was a regular stop on my route. that we would be up there 3-4 times a year. There's a spot in a stream up there that I'm not going to tell you about because it's my fishing spot, and there's great fish there. But it was detox, and it was just a mental space to be able to get that a step away. And one of the reasons I loved that fishing spot is because it had no cell reception. So it forced me in so many ways to kind of sit in that. And so, you know, what can you do to think through this? I think there's so many probably things I hope that float up that there, again, I don't want it to be another burden where it's like, feel like, okay, great, now here's another thing I got to work on, kind of a piece. But I hope it's a space to step back and really to be aware and to evaluate. And then I would encourage you, talk to people that are close in your life. You know, talk to a spouse or a loved one or a family member, talk to someone in your church, talk to a small group member, talk to someone who's in life, and like, hey, here's some of the things I'm thinking about. Am I healthy emotionally, and work-life balance and relational? Which of those things do you think I do? And just invite those conversations to your life. And that, I think, just raises so much of an opportunity for you to be able to continue to grow in this. And this is a lot of the work that we're doing at Little Cloak. I mentioned this earlier, and I'll just introduce this briefly as we're kind of coming down to the end of time. I would love to open it up to some Q&A as well. But with Little Cloak, what we're trying to do is we're trying to influence the cultures of organizations by providing mental, emotional, and spiritual care. What we do is we are a corporate chaplain service that partners with organizations on a completely virtual platform. And so if you think of something like BetterHelp, where a person can reach out and connect with a counselor or a therapist, within minutes, that's the kind of thing we're doing and providing that for organizations. We have a good number of partners that are right there in the Valley as well. And what we saw is back in 2017, when we started Little Cloak, it really became from an epidemic of mental and emotional health. We just saw this, and we saw an opportunity to be able to live out the gospel by being able to step alongside of people with a simple and safe way for every single person to be able to get care. And so that name, Little Cloak, it actually comes, the name of our company comes from a story. It's a couple hundred years ago. There's a guy named St. Martin of Tours, and St. Martin of Tours was a soldier. You can see him in the image there. He's a soldier who is actually coming home from battle, and on his way home, he looks down, and on the side of the road is a person who does not have the winter gear. He's not going to make it through the night, and so Martin actually gets down off his horse and he tears his cloak in half. He gives half of his cloak to this beggar. He surrounds him. He gets back on his horse. He goes and finishes his ride. And that night, while he's sleeping, he actually has a dream. And in the dream, he sees Jesus in the dream. And he looks at Jesus and he realizes Jesus is wearing the other half of his cloak. Well, the next morning he wakes up. He goes to the king. The king first thing says to him, "Where's the other half of your cloak?" And he tells him the story. And he says to him, I'm leaving the army, and I want to go into serving people and caring for people. And so from that point on, he becomes known as Little Cloak or Little Cape. And in the Latin, that's actually where we get the word chaplain. So the word chaplain comes from capella, little cape, little cloak. And that's the thing that we're trying to do. We are trying to just meet people where they're at to care for them at their lowest. And as we've grown, and we've talked now as an organization to well over 2,000 business owners and leaders. And what we've found is really been fascinating. It's really formed and shaped a lot of what we're doing. The majority of leaders that we meet with and connect with, they want to better care for their teams. The majority of organizations, they see mental and emotional health as a pressing issue. And many of them even want to care spiritually for them. The majority of leaders believe they need support as well for their own mental and emotional health. And this is one of the shocking things is the number of CEOs, owners, presidents who have just said, they just say to us flat out, I actually need this myself. And be able to give them a channel and a path to be able to prioritize that, to get down into the situation they're in and to work with them. And so we really see ourselves as this opportunity to get down, to meet people where they're at. And really that's one of the things that we realize first and foremost is, we're those who received that first. I was the one who was on the side of the road that needed someone to step down. And I remember the individuals who got down with the gospel and brought that to me, and how that impacted my life, and to be able to continue to do that. And so just what we're throw out there is, if you ever want to talk, whether it's about just about anything. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I realize like I got to work on some of these things, or maybe it's a place where you're like, I want to influence the culture. I want to grow stronger at this. I would love to connect. I would love to schedule a time with you to hear more of your story, to be introduced myself and tell a little bit more of my story, but also to partner together and be able to bring healthy cultures to every organization. So I'm going to open it up. Questions, kind of interaction there. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, Drew, thank you so much. This has been really incredible. Just really thought-provoking material. So yeah, just appreciate everything that you've shared today. And yeah, we do have a few more minutes left here. And so don't worry so much about the chat box now, but if you want to just unmute yourself and fire away with questions, maybe something that Drew shared that you'd like to know a little bit more about, or just even anything about Little Cloak as well. So yeah, fire away. We do have one question in the chat box that just popped in. Trisha is asking, is the monthly cost per staff member or per organization, Drew, for how you guys organize your services?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. We actually have two different pricing models where we can do it based on per staff member, or we can do it per the whole organization. We try to build it where it's accessible to every organization, no matter where they're at size-wise. And so we care for organizations as big as, we have one organization that's well over 5,000 employees, and then we have other organizations that are actually 3 employees. And so we have pricing models that kind of match to that depending on the need.
That's great.
And Trish, I saw you asked, what does the $99 a month listed cover? What that is that gives access to our platform for the organization. And so you have access to that. And then that goes actually into a pay as you go situation. And then there's a couple different channels you can go with that. So $99 gets access to the whole organization. We provide that to every employee and their family members. And so they have access to that if they want to talk to someone. And then it just depends on how you want to run that. Some organizations decide that they're going to pay for all of those sessions and they're going to be able to take care of that themselves. Others say, hey, we're going to split the cost. And others will say, oh, the employees can pay for this themselves, and they have access to that there. But it just gives them access. One of the big things we're running into, and I don't want to go too long on this, but if you go and do quick research on people trying to get access to good help, right now, the wait list right now is typically anywhere from 90 to 120 days. And so if one of your employees wants to talk to someone, the idea that they have to wait for 3 to 6 months to be able to talk to someone is just, that's the place where we're like, no, you can set up an appointment. And if, so Trisha, one of you or your teammates want to be able to talk to someone, they could talk to someone tonight with one of our team. We do under function under chaplains. Most of our team are licensed as counselors or therapists, but because of state regulations on those titles, they actually have to do it under the umbrella of chaplains. And so that's one-on-one, and whenever they need it, wherever they need it, they can just book an appointment there.
Yeah, great. Any other questions for Drew? Just yeah, fire away on anything. Everybody good here?
I was going to say, we're not going to ask you personally to raise your hand or speak up, but how many of you know that this is something you need, and goes, so what's that next step? And I really appreciate, Drew, that you are offering a free consultation to anyone, whether that is to talk more about your services or even just talk. So that's something coming away from here. If you go, I do need this myself, you could set up that, contact Drew and just talk through some, things at a personal level, because he really made a great case for our organizational culture starts with us as leaders. So love that. Thank you.
Yep. And that's what I meant when I say you don't have to figure this out alone. And I'm actually saying, hey, we're here for you too. If you
Yeah.
need someone to talk to, or maybe someone in your organization, you're just like, hey, they need someone to talk to, and I don't know where to. That's what we're here for, and we would love to help you in that. We're not trying to make money off of this. We're really just trying to get help to people where they need it most.
Yeah, wonderful. And we will send out as part of the follow-up this contact information for Drew as well. And then you can reach out directly for him. Drew, I do have one question, but I'll just ask you offline, which is I need to know where that fishing spot is. Um, anyone that knows me knows that's a joke, because I don't know what the opposite of a person who fishes is, but that would be me. So anyway. But
We won't
no,
even hike to the fishing place,
no, you could, yeah, you could give me directions to it. I wouldn't be able to find it. I wouldn't know how to do. Yeah,
You're,
your secret would be very safe with me, I
I'm
guess
not,
is what I'm saying.
Jonathan, I'm not going to tell you, but I will say, the reason I love it is I can take my kids there, and my kids were 4 years old and they were catching fish. So
Wow. Okay.
So
it's
what we're hearing you say is, if we kidnap your children, then we could find. No, I'm
they,
just kidding.
they
They
would
could
for
lead us to
sure
the spot.
they
They
would
could lead us to the spot.
have
Oh.
sworn them to secrecy as well. So we'll see.
Oh.
Okay.
Well,
Uh,
Drew, thank you so much. I just wonder,
Thank you.
Drew, as we close out, would you just pray
love to.
for us and for these leaders? And again, everybody, look for the follow-up information. And thanks so much for taking the time today. But yeah, Drew, please pray for us.
Great. Heavenly Father, thank you for just a moment to step back and to see just where I'm at, where each person here is at. You know our hearts, our longing and our desire is to lead as those who represent you well, who reflect the gospel well. And so, Father, would you come and you just stir up in us a sense of, I pray for the one who's wrestling with they're feeling exhausted, they're feeling overwhelmed right now, and and are aware of they've maybe already put in so many hours into so many pieces. God, would you come in your spirit and refresh them? Would you give them a sense and awareness that relief is here, and that you are the one who's going to fulfill all that we can gain the whole world, but we don't want to lose our souls. And so would we be able to come to this place of coming to you as those who may be weary and heavy laden, and believing and knowing that promise that you will give us rest. And so would your rest even just flow through those who are listening now, as well as those who are listening in the future, that there would just be a supernatural sense of rest that would flow into this, and a sense of just impacting each little organization, each large organization, a sense of culture shifting in this awareness of what you're providing, what you're done through your son, Jesus Christ. We know we can believe this, and we know we can see this. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.